Standing before the towering stones of Stonehenge, you feel it. That inexplicable sensation that washes over you when confronted by something so impossibly massive, so perfectly placed, that your mind struggles to comprehend how it came to be. These aren't just rocks scattered by nature's whim. These are monuments, deliberate, precise, built with a purpose that stretches back through millennia, whispering secrets we've barely begun to understand. Across our planet, from the windswept plains of England to the remote highlands of Easter Island, from the dense jungles of Cambodia to the scorching deserts of Egypt, these megalithic structures stand as silent sentinels, stone circles that dwarf modern buildings, pyramids that would challenge today's engineering capabilities, temples carved from bedrock with such precision that you can't slip a knife blade between the joints. And here's what haunts archaeologists, engineers, and anyone who's ever stood in their shadow. The official timeline doesn't add up. We're told these monuments were built by ancient humans using primitive tools, Bronze Age farmers with wooden rollers and rope, Stone Age hunter-gatherers with nothing but determination and time. But when you really look at the evidence, when you examine the weight of these stones, the precision of their placement, the sheer audacity of their construction, a different picture begins to emerge. What if everything we've been taught about our ancient past is incomplete? What if there's a chapter missing from the story of human civilization? What if these megalithic wonders weren't built by ordinary humans at all, but by beings whose physical capabilities far exceeded our own? Welcome to a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about our ancestors. I'm about to present evidence that suggests these ancient monuments, these impossible achievements in stone, might be the work of giants. Not the mythological creatures of fairy tales, but real, flesh and blood beings who once walked this earth alongside early humans. Beings whose very existence has been systematically erased from mainstream history. Over the next hour, we're going to explore archaeological evidence that mainstream science refuses to acknowledge. We'll examine ancient texts from cultures across the globe that describe encounters with beings of extraordinary size and strength. We'll investigate the engineering impossibilities that these megalithic sites present, and ask the question that archaeologists whisper in private but dare not voice in public. How did our supposed primitive ancestors accomplish feats that would challenge us even today? But first, let me show you something that will fundamentally change how you view these ancient sites. Because when you understand the true scale of what we're dealing with, when you see the mathematical precision hidden in plain sight, you'll realize that we're not just looking at impressive architecture. We're looking at proof of capabilities that shouldn't have existed thousands of years ago. The conventional narrative tells us that human civilization progressed in a straight line, from nomadic tribes to settled agriculture, from simple tools to complex societies. It's a comforting story of gradual progress, of human ingenuity slowly conquering the natural world. But this narrative has a problem. It can't explain the megaliths. At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 limestone blocks weighing over 800 tons each form part of a foundation wall. To put that in perspective, these stones are heavier than 2 fully loaded Boeing 747 jumbo jets. They were quarried from a site nearly a mile away, transported across uneven terrain, lifted to a height of 20 feet, and placed with such precision that the joints between them are nearly invisible. This was accomplished over 2,000 years ago, yet today's largest mobile crane can only lift about 200 tons under optimal conditions, and even then, only for very short distances. In Peru, at the ancient fortress of Sacsayhuamán, stones weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together with such precision that you cannot insert even a sheet of paper between them. The surfaces are so smooth and the angles so perfect that they appear to have been machined. Yet we're told this was accomplished by the Incas using only bronze tools and human labour. Bronze tools that would shatter against the hardest granite. Human labour that somehow moved blocks the size of modern houses up mountainsides at altitudes where the air is so thin that today's construction workers require oxygen assistance. On Easter Island, nearly 900 monolithic statues called moai stand as monuments to an engineering feat that seems impossible for the small population that supposedly created them. The average moai weighs 14 tons, but some weigh as much as 80 tons. They were carved from volcanic rock at a single quarry site and then somehow transported across the island to their current positions. The accepted explanation is that the islanders rolled them on wooden logs, But this theory falls apart when you consider that Easter Island was almost completely deforested by the time Europeans arrived. Where did all those logs come from? And how did a population of a few thousand people organise the massive workforce required to move nearly 900 multi-ton statues? These aren't isolated examples. They're part of a global pattern that spans continents and millennia. From Newgrange in Ireland, built before Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids, to the massive stone spheres of Costa Rica, to the underground cities of Derinkuyu in Turkey, we find evidence of construction techniques and organisational capabilities that supposedly didn't exist in ancient times. But here's what makes this pattern even more intriguing. These megalithic sites aren't randomly distributed across the globe. They follow specific geographical alignments. They incorporate sophisticated astronomical calculations. They demonstrate knowledge of mathematics and engineering principles that weren't supposed to be discovered until thousands of years later. This isn't the work of scattered primitive tribes. This is evidence of a coordinated, knowledgeable civilization with capabilities that we're only now beginning to understand. And there's something else. Something that mainstream archaeology desperately wants to ignore. At sites around the world, we find human remains that don't fit the accepted model of human evolution. Skeletons that are simply too large to belong to ordinary humans. In 1950, in the Jordan Valley, archaeologist Ralph Glidden discovered remains of individuals measuring between 7 and 9 feet tall. In Nevada, the Humboldt Museum displays photographs of excavated skeletons that appear to be from individuals over 8 feet in height. Similar discoveries have been reported from sites in Ohio, California, and dozens of other locations across North America. The Smithsonian Institution, America's premier archaeological authority, has been accused by researchers of systematically collecting and then making these oversized remains disappear from public view. Documents from the 1800s describe excavations of burial mounds containing skeletons of unusual size. But when modern researchers attempt to examine these remains, they're told they've been lost, misplaced, or destroyed. Why would anyone want to hide evidence of giant humans? Because it doesn't fit the narrative. It challenges the linear progression model of human development. It suggests that our ancestors shared the world with beings whose very existence would force us to rewrite history books and reconsider everything we think we know about the past. But the evidence goes beyond just skeletal remains. Ancient texts from cultures across the globe describe encounters with giants. The Hebrew Bible speaks of the Nephilim, beings of great stature who lived alongside early humans. Greek mythology tells of titans and cyclops, giant beings who built massive stone structures. Hindu texts describe the Daityas, a race of powerful giants who possessed advanced knowledge. Norse mythology speaks of the Jötuns, giant beings who shaped the landscape itself. These aren't just stories, they're cultural memories. And when you find similar accounts in cultures that had no contact with each other, separated by oceans and millennia, you have to ask, what if they're describing real events? What if these myths are actually historical accounts, passed down through generations describing a time when giants walked the earth? Consider the implications. If these beings existed, if they possessed the physical strength and technological knowledge to move massive stones with ease, then suddenly the megalithic mysteries start to make sense. The impossible construction techniques become possible. The organizational capabilities become plausible. The precision and scale become achievable. But this raises an even more provocative question. What happened to them? If giants once existed alongside humans, why don't we see them today? The ancient texts provide some clues. Many describe conflicts between giants and humans. Wars that ended with the giants being defeated, destroyed, or driven away. The biblical account of David and Goliath isn't just a story about courage conquering strength. It might be a cultural memory of the final chapters in a long conflict between two different species sharing the same world. Some researchers suggest that these giants weren't a separate species at all, but humans who lived in a different environment. Perhaps in the distant past, Earth's atmospheric conditions, gravity, or other environmental factors allowed humans to grow to much larger sizes. When those conditions changed, either gradually through natural processes or suddenly through some catastrophic event, the age of giants came to an end. Others propose that these beings weren't from Earth at all. that they were visitors from elsewhere, possessing advanced technology that allowed them to manipulate massive stones as easily as we move concrete blocks today. In this scenario, the megalithic sites aren't just monuments but remnants of an ancient interaction between humanity and beings from beyond our world. Whatever the truth, one thing is certain: the conventional explanation for the megaliths doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The tools don't match the task, the timeline doesn't allow for the development of the necessary techniques, the population levels don't support the required workforce, and the precision of the construction suggests knowledge and capabilities that supposedly didn't exist. So we're left with a choice. We can continue to accept the inadequate explanations offered by mainstream archaeology, explanations that require us to ignore the obvious impossibilities and trust that somehow primitive humans accomplished feats that challenge us even today. Or we can open our minds to the possibility that there's more to our past than we've been told, that the megalithic sites are evidence of a chapter in human history that has been deliberately obscured or accidentally lost. The evidence is there, carved in stone and buried in the earth. Ancient texts describe it. Archaeological discoveries confirm it. Engineering analysis demands it. The only thing missing is the courage to acknowledge what it all means. In the next part of our investigation, we're going to examine specific megalithic sites in detail, exploring the engineering impossibilities that each one presents. We'll look at the precision of the stone cutting, the mathematical relationships encoded in their layouts, and the astronomical alignments that suggest knowledge far beyond what primitive cultures should have possessed. We'll also investigate the systematic suppression of archaeological evidence that doesn't fit the accepted timeline, and explore why certain discoveries have been hidden from public view. Because once you see the evidence, once you understand the true scale of what we're dealing with, you'll realize that the megalithic sites aren't just ancient monuments. They're proof that our understanding of human history is fundamentally incomplete. They're evidence that beings of extraordinary capabilities once walked this earth, leaving behind stone monuments so massive and so precisely constructed that they continue to baffle us thousands of years later. The question isn't whether giants existed. The question is what happened to them, and why their story has been erased from our history books. The stones remember, even if we've chosen to forget. Let's travel to Peru, high in the Andes Mountains, where the ruins of Sacsayhuamán overlook the ancient city of Cusco. Here, at an altitude of nearly 12,000 feet where the air is so thin that modern construction crews require supplemental oxygen, we find evidence that should fundamentally change how we view ancient engineering capabilities. The fortress walls of Sacsayhuamán aren't built from uniform blocks cut to standard sizes. Instead, they're constructed from irregularly shaped stones, each one unique, fitted together like pieces of a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. Some of these stones weigh over 200 tons. That's equivalent to about 40 elephants stacked on top of each other. Yet they've been cut and shaped with such precision that the joints between them are nearly invisible. Run your hand along these walls and you'll feel surfaces so smooth they seem almost polished. The angles where these massive blocks meet are so precise that they appear to have been machined by modern equipment. But here's what makes this even more remarkable. These stones aren't made of soft limestone or sandstone. They're carved from andesite and diorite, some of the hardest rocks on Earth. Materials so tough that they would quickly dull or shatter the bronze tools that the Incas supposedly used. I've spoken with master stonemasons, craftsmen who've spent decades working with stone using modern tools and techniques. They tell me that achieving this level of precision in such hard materials, even with today's diamond-tipped cutting equipment and computer-controlled machinery, would be an extraordinary challenge. Yet we're expected to believe that ancient builders accomplished this using primitive tools and manual labour at an altitude where physical exertion becomes exhausting within minutes. But the precision of the stonework is only part of the puzzle. How were these massive blocks transported to this mountaintop location? The nearest quarry sites are miles away, and the terrain between them and Sacsayhuamán includes steep inclines, narrow mountain passes, and sections where the path barely wide enough for a single person. Moving a 200-ton stone block across this landscape using ropes and wooden rollers would require hundreds of workers, perfect coordination, and engineering solutions that supposedly hadn't been invented yet. Let me put this in modern perspective. When construction companies today need to move extremely heavy loads, They used specialized equipment, massive cranes, reinforced roadways, and carefully planned routes. Even then, moving objects weighing more than 100 tons requires months of preparation and teams of engineers. The largest mobile crane in the world can lift about 200 tons, but only straight up, and only for very short distances. It cannot transport that weight across miles of mountainous terrain. Yet somehow, using technology that mainstream archaeology insists was limited to rope, wooden levers, and human muscle power, ancient builders moved stones weighing 200 tons or more across some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, then lifted them 20 feet into the air and positioned them with millimeter precision. The conventional explanation relies on the assumption that what seems impossible to us was somehow routine for ancient peoples, that they possess techniques and organizational capabilities that we've somehow forgotten or lost. But this explanation requires us to believe that civilizations using Bronze Age technology consistently achieved results that challenge our modern capabilities. There's another possibility, one that archaeologists whisper about in private but rarely discuss in academic papers. What if the builders of Sacsayhuamán weren't working within the same physical limitations that constrain ordinary humans? What if they possess strength and capabilities far beyond what we consider normal? This isn't just speculation based on the impossibility of the construction techniques. There's direct evidence that the builders of these sites were physically different from modern humans. In the Cusco region, archaeologists have discovered elongated skulls with cranial capacities significantly larger than normal human skulls. These aren't the result of artificial cranial deformation, a practice where infant skulls are bound to change their shape. These skulls show fundamental structural differences that suggest they belong to beings with naturally larger brain cavities. DNA analysis of some of these remains has yielded puzzling results. Genetic material that doesn't match any known human populations. Mitochondrial DNA sequences that appear to represent an unknown branch of the human family tree. When researchers attempt to publish these findings, they encounter resistance from academic institutions that prefer to maintain the standard narrative of human development. But the evidence extends beyond just unusual skeletal remains. Ancient Peruvian texts, recorded by Spanish chroniclers during the conquest, describe the builders of sites like Sacsayhuamán as beings of extraordinary size and strength. These accounts, dismissed by modern historians as mythology or exaggeration, consistently describe giants who could move massive stones as easily as ordinary humans move small rocks. The Inca themselves claim that they didn't build Sacsayhuamán. According to their oral traditions, the fortress was constructed by a previous civilization, beings they called the Huari, who possessed capabilities far beyond those of ordinary humans. The Inca said they merely maintained and modified structures that already existed when they arrived in the region. This pattern repeats itself at megalithic sites around the world. Local populations consistently attribute the construction of the most impressive stone monuments to previous civilizations, to giants, or to beings with supernatural capabilities. They don't claim credit for achievements that modern archaeology insists they accomplished. Travel north from Peru to the plains of southern England, and you encounter another megalithic mystery that defies conventional explanation. Stonehenge, perhaps the most famous stone circle in the world, presents engineering challenges that mainstream archaeology has never adequately addressed. The monument consists of two types of stone, smaller blue stones weighing 2 to 4 tons each, and massive sarsen stones weighing up to 50 tons. The blue stones were transported from quarries in Wales, a distance of over 150 miles. The sarsen stones came from the Marlborough Downs, about 20 miles north of the site. But here's what makes this remarkable. There are no roads, no rivers, no easy transportation routes between these quarry sites and Stonehenge. The accepted theory is that Neolithic builders somehow moved these multi-ton stones across the landscape using wooden rollers, earthen ramps, and rope. But practical experiments attempting to replicate these techniques have consistently failed. Teams of dozens of people, using reconstructed ancient tools and methods, can barely move stones weighing a few tons across flat ground. Moving 50-ton sarsen stones across 20 miles of rolling hills and valleys would require a workforce numbering in the thousands, perfect coordination, and logistical capabilities that supposedly didn't exist 4,500 years ago. But the transportation is only part of the challenge. Once these massive stones reached the construction site, they had to be positioned with extraordinary precision. The sarsen trailerthons, those iconic paired vertical stones topped by horizontal lintels, are aligned to within fractions of a degree. The joints between the vertical stones and the lintels are secured using mortise and tenon connections, woodworking techniques applied to massive stone blocks. The precision required to create these connections to ensure that multi-ton lintels would sit perfectly level across paired uprights represents an engineering achievement that would challenge modern builders. Archaeological experiments have attempted to demonstrate how Neolithic people could have erected these trilithons using period-appropriate techniques. The results are instructive. Even with modern safety equipment, power tools for preparation work, and teams of experienced construction workers, these attempts have been fraught with difficulty and danger. Several experiments have failed entirely, with stones falling and equipment breaking under the enormous stresses involved. Yet we're expected to believe that Bronze Age farmers, working without metal tools, without mechanical advantage beyond simple levers and ramps, accomplished something that modern experimental archaeologists can barely manage with contemporary assistance. The astronomical alignments built into Stonehenge add another layer of complexity to this puzzle. The monument is precisely oriented to mark the summer and winter solstices. Sight lines through the stone circle mark the rising and setting positions of the sun at these crucial points in the year. But achieving this level of astronomical accuracy requires not just knowledge of celestial mechanics, but the ability to predict these positions years in advance, during the planning and construction phases. This suggests that the builders possessed sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge. They understood concepts like the obliquity of the ecliptic, the angle at which Earth's axis tilts relative to its orbital plane. They could calculate solar positions with precision that wouldn't be matched again until the development of modern astronomy. Yet mainstream archaeology insists this was accomplished by people who supposedly hadn't developed writing, metallurgy, or even the wheel. The scale of the undertaking becomes even more remarkable when you consider the time frame. Radiocarbon dating suggests that Stonehenge was constructed over a period of about 500 years, with the major stone construction phase occurring around 2600 to 2400 BCE. This means that multiple generations of builders worked on the project, maintaining not just the physical construction techniques, but the astronomical knowledge required to ensure proper alignment. Maintaining this level of technical consistency across centuries requires institutional knowledge, formal education systems, and probably written records. It requires a stable, organized society with the resources to support specialized craftsmen and the authority to coordinate massive construction projects. Yet the archaeological record from Neolithic Britain shows no evidence of the complex social structures that such an undertaking would require, unless, of course, the builders weren't constrained by ordinary human limitations, unless they possessed physical capabilities and organizational structures that we don't associate with Bronze Age populations. Consider the implications if the builders of Stonehenge were beings of extraordinary size and strength. Multi-ton stones that would require dozens of ordinary humans to move could be handled by a few individuals of giant stature. Complex construction techniques that would require elaborate planning and coordination could be accomplished by beings with superior intelligence and longer lifespans. The astronomical knowledge embedded in the monument's design makes more sense if we assume the builders had capabilities beyond those of early human populations. Giants, if they existed, might have possessed not just physical advantages but intellectual capabilities that allowed them to understand and predict celestial mechanics with extraordinary precision. This isn't just theoretical speculation. There's direct evidence that the builders of megalithic sites possessed knowledge and capabilities that far exceeded what we associate with ancient civilizations. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, stone circles dating to around 9600 BCE display astronomical alignments and sophisticated carving techniques that predate the supposed development of agriculture by thousands of years. The site was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE, suggesting that its builders possessed not just the knowledge to create it, but the foresight to preserve it for future discovery. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza incorporates mathematical relationships that weren't formally discovered until thousands of years after its construction. The monument's base perimeter divided by its height equals pi to several decimal places. Its internal passages align with specific stars with precision that requires detailed knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes star positions to shift over centuries. These aren't coincidences or lucky accidents. They're evidence of deliberate design by builders who possessed mathematical and astronomical knowledge that supposedly didn't exist in their time period. Knowledge that suggests capabilities far beyond those of ordinary ancient humans. The evidence is overwhelming, carved in stone and embedded in the landscape. Megalithic sites around the world display construction techniques, astronomical alignments, and mathematical precision that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. They suggest that our ancestors, or beings who lived alongside our ancestors, possessed knowledge and abilities that we're only now beginning to appreciate. But if these capabilities existed, if giants or other extraordinary beings once walked the earth and built these monuments, what happened to them? Why don't we see evidence of them in the historical record? Why have their achievements been attributed to ordinary humans using primitive techniques? The answers to these questions lie not just in archaeology, but in the systematic suppression of evidence that doesn't fit established narratives. In the next section, we'll explore how discoveries that challenge conventional timelines are marginalized, discredited, or made to disappear entirely. We'll examine specific cases where skeletal remains of unusual size have been found and then mysteriously lost or destroyed. We'll investigate the institutional mechanisms that ensure certain types of evidence never reach public awareness, because the stones remember what we've been taught to forget. The megalithic monuments stand as permanent testimony to capabilities that officially never existed. And until we acknowledge what they really represent, we'll continue to underestimate both our past and our potential. The trail of suppressed evidence leads us through dusty archives and forgotten museum storage rooms, where boxes labelled with cryptic numbers contain discoveries that were never meant to see daylight. In 1912, ranch workers digging a well near Lovelock, Nevada, broke through into a cave system that would yield one of the most significant archaeological finds in North American history. What they discovered inside would challenge everything we thought we knew about the continent's ancient inhabitants. The Lovelock Cave contained the mummified remains of individuals measuring between 8 and 10 feet in height. These weren't isolated specimens, but an entire population of giants, preserved by the dry desert climate for thousands of years. The remains showed clear evidence of a sophisticated culture, with intricate basketry, advanced tool-making techniques, and weapons designed for beings of extraordinary size and strength. Local Paiute tribes had oral traditions describing these giants, calling them the Site Ka, meaning tule eaters, after their practice of weaving rafts from tule reeds. According to Paiute legend, these red-haired giants were hostile to smaller humans, leading to conflicts that eventually resulted in the giants being driven into caves and destroyed. The archaeological evidence from Lovelock Cave seemed to confirm these ancient accounts. Dr. Joseph Reed, the archaeologist who led the initial excavation, documented skulls with unusual characteristics, femur bones indicating heights well over 8 feet, and artifacts scaled for beings of enormous stature. His detailed reports, complete with photographs and measurements, were submitted to the Nevada Historical Society and the Smithsonian Institution for further study. Then something extraordinary happened. The remains disappeared. When researchers in the 1990s attempted to locate the Lovelock Cave specimens for DNA analysis and modern dating techniques, they were told the materials had been lost, misplaced during a move, destroyed in a flood. The explanations varied, but the result was always the same. Physical evidence that could definitively prove the existence of giant humans in ancient America was no longer available for study. This pattern repeats itself with disturbing frequency across archaeological sites throughout North America. In Ohio's Seneca County, excavations in the 1800s uncovered skeletons measuring up to 9 feet in length, with skulls showing cranial capacities significantly larger than modern humans. The Smithsonian reportedly collected these remains for study, but no records of their analysis exist in institutional archives. In California's Catalina Island, Ralph Glidden's excavations in the early 1900s revealed burial sites containing individuals of unusual stature. Glidden, a trained archaeologist, carefully documented his finds with photographs, measurements, and detailed site reports. His work was featured in newspapers of the era and drew significant scientific attention. Yet when modern researchers attempt to examine Glidden specimens, they find that most have vanished from museum collections. The systematic disappearance of giant skeletal remains isn't limited to North America. Similar patterns emerge from archaeological sites worldwide. In Romania, discoveries of unusually large human remains are quickly removed from excavation sites and disappear into private collections or institutional storage facilities that deny public access. In Australia, Aboriginal oral traditions describe encounters with giant beings, and archaeological sites occasionally yield evidence supporting these accounts, but such findings rarely make it into peer-reviewed publications. This suppression isn't accidental. It's the result of institutional policies that prioritize maintaining established narratives over investigating anomalous evidence. Academic careers are built on supporting accepted theories, not challenging them. Researchers who report findings that don't fit conventional timelines find their work marginalized, their funding reduced, and their professional reputations questioned. But the evidence persists in places where institutional control is less absolute. Private collections contain specimens that museums won't display. Local historical societies preserve photographs and documents that major institutions prefer to ignore, and occasionally new discoveries surface that are too significant to suppress entirely. In 2005, construction workers building a shopping centre in southeastern Ohio broke into a previously unknown burial mound. The emergency archaeological survey that followed uncovered skeletal remains of individuals measuring between 7 and 8 feet in height, along with artefacts suggesting a sophisticated material culture. The discovery made local news before being quietly transferred to state archaeological authorities. When researchers attempted to follow up on this discovery, they encountered bureaucratic obstacles that prevented further study. The site was declared culturally sensitive and closed to investigation. The remains were transferred to an undisclosed location for proper storage and respect for indigenous cultural practices. Attempts to obtain permits for additional research were denied without explanation. This bureaucratic maze serves a specific purpose. It ensures that discoveries challenging established narratives are isolated from scientific scrutiny. Individual researchers can be discredited or marginalized, but institutional policies create systematic barriers that prevent comprehensive investigation of anomalous evidence. The motivation for this suppression becomes clearer when you consider the implications of accepting giant human remains as authentic. If beings of extraordinary size once lived alongside ordinary humans, it suggests that our understanding of human evolution is fundamentally incomplete. It implies that the archaeological record has gaps that haven't been acknowledged. It raises questions about the relationships between different human populations and their respective capabilities. Most significantly, it validates the possibility that megalithic monuments were built by beings with physical capabilities far exceeding those of ordinary humans. If 8 to 10 foot tall humans once existed, beings with proportionally increased strength and endurance, then moving massive stone blocks becomes not just possible but practical. Consider the engineering implications. A human being 8 feet tall would possess roughly twice the muscle mass of a 6-foot individual, but strength increases exponentially with size, not linearly. An 8-foot human would likely possess 3 to 4 times the lifting capacity of an ordinary person. A coordinated team of such individuals could move stones weighing tens of tons using techniques that would be impossible for smaller humans. This explains not just the transportation of megalithic stones, but their precise placement. Beings of giant stature would have the reach and leverage necessary to position massive blocks with the millimeter accuracy we observe at sites like Sacsayhuamán and Stonehenge. They could work at heights that would be dangerous or impossible for ordinary humans. They could maintain the physical stamina necessary for projects spanning decades or centuries. But giants weren't just physically superior. The enlarged cranial capacities observed in skeletal remains suggest increased brain volume, potentially indicating enhanced cognitive abilities. Beings with both physical and intellectual advantages could have developed sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge millennia before such understanding supposedly emerged in human civilization. This cognitive superiority might explain the astronomical alignments built into megalithic sites. The precise calculations required to predict celestial positions years in advance to account for precession and other complex astronomical phenomena suggest mental capabilities that exceed those typically associated with ancient humans. Ancient texts from cultures worldwide describe giants not just as physically imposing, but as possessors of advanced knowledge. The Hebrew Bible speaks of the Nephilim as mighty men of old, men of renown, suggesting they were recognized for intellectual achievements as well as physical prowess. Greek accounts describe titans who taught humans various arts and sciences. Hindu texts speak of giant beings who possessed advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. These descriptions align with the evidence we find at megalithic sites. The combination of massive stone construction requiring extraordinary physical strength and sophisticated astronomical alignments demanding advanced mathematical knowledge suggest builders who possessed both attributes simultaneously. But if giants existed and possessed these capabilities, why don't we find more evidence of their presence? The answer lies partly in the systematic suppression we've already discussed, but there are other factors at play. Giant beings, if they existed, would have required proportionally larger amounts of food and resources than ordinary humans. During periods of environmental stress, climate change, or resource scarcity, populations of giants would be more vulnerable than smaller human populations. Archaeological evidence suggests that many megalithic sites were abandoned during specific time periods that correspond to known climate changes or environmental disasters. The end of the last ice age, around 11,000 years ago, brought dramatic changes in sea levels, weather patterns, and available resources. Populations that were already stressed by their larger resource requirements might not have survived these transitions. There's also evidence of conflicts between giant populations and ordinary humans. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe wars between giants and smaller human populations. The biblical account of David and Goliath, rather than being a simple moral tale, might represent a cultural memory of these conflicts. Archaeological sites sometimes show evidence of deliberate destruction, as if settlements were attacked and burned by hostile forces. The survivors of such conflicts would have strong motivations to eliminate traces of their former adversaries. Destroying records, dispersing remains, and suppressing stories about giants would be natural consequences of intergroup warfare. Over generations, the historical reality would fade into mythology, then into folk tales, finally disappearing entirely from popular memory. Modern suppression efforts might represent the continuation of this ancient pattern. If institutional authorities believe that acknowledging the existence of giants would be socially disruptive or politically inconvenient, they would have powerful motivations to ensure such evidence remains hidden. The systematic removal of giant skeletal remains from public access serves this purpose. But suppression becomes increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and independent research. Photographs of giant skeletal remains circulate on social media platforms. Private researchers share information through online networks that bypass traditional academic gatekeepers. Local communities preserve oral traditions and historical accounts that contradict official narratives. The evidence continues to accumulate despite institutional resistance. New discoveries surface regularly, though they rarely receive mainstream attention. Construction projects occasionally uncover burial sites containing unusually large human remains. Private collectors acquire specimens through estate sales and auction houses. Independent researchers document anomalous archaeological sites using technologies that weren't available to earlier investigators. DNA analysis techniques now allow researchers to extract genetic material from ancient remains and compare it to modern human populations. These analyses sometimes reveal genetic markers that don't match any known human groups, suggesting that ancient populations included beings that were genetically distinct from modern humans. When such results are obtained, they typically disappear into institutional storage rather than being published in peer-reviewed journals. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive archaeological techniques can now detect buried structures and remains without the need for formal excavation permits. Independent researchers using these technologies sometimes discover evidence of giant skeletal remains at sites that have been declared archaeologically insignificant by official authorities. The disconnect between what technology reveals and what institutions acknowledge becomes increasingly obvious. photographic evidence from the 19th and early 20th centuries, before institutional suppression became systematic, provides a historical record of giant discoveries that can no longer be dismissed as folklore or exaggeration. These images, preserved in local historical societies and private collections, show clearly documented excavations of unusually large human remains. The cumulative weight of this evidence, despite decades of suppression, builds a compelling case for the historical existence of giant human populations. When combined with the engineering impossibilities presented by megalithic sites, it suggests a coherent alternative explanation for our ancient past. But accepting this evidence requires acknowledging that mainstream archaeology has been fundamentally wrong about human history. It means recognizing that our ancestors shared the world with beings whose capabilities far exceeded those of ordinary humans. It implies that the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world weren't accomplished by primitive peoples using simple tools, but by giants whose physical and intellectual abilities allowed them to move mountains and align their constructions with the stars. The megalithic monuments stand as permanent testimony to these lost capabilities. Their massive stones and precise alignments can't be explained away by conventional theories. Their astronomical sophistication can't be attributed to lucky guesswork by primitive astronomers. Their global distribution suggests coordinated efforts that transcend the supposed limitations of ancient transportation and communication. Yet mainstream archaeology continues to insist that these monuments were built by ordinary humans using Bronze Age technology. This insistence requires ignoring obvious engineering impossibilities, dismissing clear evidence of suppressed discoveries, and maintaining institutional policies that prevent honest investigation of anomalous findings. The time has come to acknowledge what the stones have been telling us all along. The megalithic monuments weren't built by our ancestors as we understand them. They were built by giants, beings whose existence has been systematically erased from our historical record but whose achievements remain carved in stone for those willing to see the truth. In our final section, we'll explore what this means for our understanding of human potential and our relationship to the ancient world. We'll examine how recognizing the reality of giants changes not just our view of the past, but our expectations for the future. Because if beings of extraordinary capabilities once walked this earth and left behind monuments that still inspire awe today, what does that tell us about the possibilities that lie dormant within humanity itself? The implications extend far beyond archaeology. If we accept that giants once existed and built these megalithic monuments, we must confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of human development and our place in the larger story of Earth's history. We're not just talking about revising textbooks or updating museum displays. We're talking about fundamentally reimagining what it means to be human. Throughout recorded history, humans have told themselves a comforting narrative of progress. We evolved from primitive beginnings, gradually developing language, tools, agriculture, and civilization. Each generation built upon the achievements of the previous one, slowly ascending from caves to cities to space travel. It's a story of inevitable advancement, of human ingenuity conquering every obstacle through determination and time. But what if this narrative is incomplete? What if human history isn't a steady climb upward, but a cycle of rise and fall, of capabilities gained and lost, of civilizations that reached extraordinary heights before vanishing into legend? The megalithic monuments suggest exactly this kind of cyclical history, where beings of remarkable abilities created wonders that we struggle to understand, let alone replicate. Consider what this means for our understanding of human potential. Modern humans, despite all our technology and scientific knowledge, cannot easily replicate the precision stonework found at ancient sites. We cannot move 800-ton blocks across mountainous terrain using only human power. We cannot achieve the astronomical accuracy built into structures like Stonehenge without sophisticated instruments and mathematical calculations. Yet these achievements exist. They stand before us, carved in stone, aligned with celestial precision, defying our attempts to explain them within conventional frameworks. If ordinary humans didn't build them, and if giants did exist, then we must ask, what happened to these capabilities? Where did they go? And more importantly, could they return? The genetic evidence, fragmentary as it is due to institutional suppression, suggests that giant humans weren't a separate species but variants within the human family tree. DNA analysis of anomalous skeletal remains, when it's permitted to proceed, often reveals genetic markers that are recognizably human but distinct from modern populations. This suggests that the capacity for extraordinary size and strength might be latent within human genetics, suppressed by environmental factors or evolutionary pressures but not permanently lost. We see hints of this potential in modern human populations. Individuals with gigantism, caused by genetic variations affecting growth hormone production, can reach heights of 8 feet or more. While these conditions are often associated with health problems in our current environment, they demonstrate that the genetic mechanisms for producing giant-sized humans still exist within our species. What if the environmental conditions that once supported populations of healthy giants could be recreated? What if the atmospheric composition, gravitational effects, or other planetary conditions that allowed our ancestors to grow to extraordinary sizes were somehow restored? The implications would be staggering, not just for our understanding of the past, but for the future of human development. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe a golden age when giants and humans coexisted, when knowledge flowed freely between different populations, and when architectural and astronomical achievements reached heights that seem impossible today. These accounts, dismissed as mythology by mainstream historians, might actually be cultural memories of a time when human civilization operated at levels we can barely comprehend. The Hindu concept of cyclical time, with its yugas or ages of varying spiritual and technological advancement, describes exactly this kind of rise and fall in human capabilities. According to these texts, we currently live in the Kali Yuga, an age of reduced spiritual awareness and technological dependence, having fallen from previous ages when humans possessed abilities that seem supernatural to us today. Similar cyclical concepts appear in Greek mythology, with its golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages, each representing a decline from the previous era's capabilities. The biblical account of the antediluvian world, where humans lived for centuries and possessed knowledge that was lost in the flood, echoes this same theme of ancient capabilities that exceed our current understanding. These aren't just stories. They might be historical accounts, preserved in mythological form, describing real periods when human populations included beings of extraordinary size, strength, and longevity. The megalithic monuments would be the physical remnants of these lost ages, stone testaments to capabilities that we've forgotten we once possessed. But recognizing this possibility requires confronting the systematic suppression of evidence that challenges conventional narratives. The disappearance of giant skeletal remains from museum collections isn't accidental oversight. It's deliberate policy, implemented by institutions that understand the implications of acknowledging these discoveries. Why would anyone want to suppress evidence of human giants? Because it changes everything. It suggests that human history is far more complex and mysterious than we've been taught. It implies that our ancestors possessed capabilities that we've lost, knowledge that we've forgotten, and achievements that we can't replicate. It challenges the fundamental assumption that human civilization has been steadily progressing toward greater understanding and capability. More disturbing still, it raises questions about whether this loss of capability was natural or artificial. If giants once existed alongside ordinary humans, what caused their disappearance? Was it environmental change, genetic drift, or something more deliberate? Did conflicts between different human populations result in the systematic elimination of those with extraordinary abilities? The archaeological record shows clear evidence of violence at many megalithic sites. Structures that took generations to build were sometimes deliberately destroyed, their stones scattered or buried. Burial sites containing giant remains often show signs of disturbance, as if someone actively sought to eliminate evidence of these populations. Ancient texts describe wars between giants and smaller humans, conflicts that ended with the giants being defeated or driven away. The biblical account of the conquest of Canaan specifically mentions the destruction of giant populations, describing them as obstacles to be eliminated rather than peoples to be integrated. Similar accounts appear in the mythologies of cultures worldwide, suggesting that these conflicts were global phenomena rather than isolated regional events. If these accounts describe real historical events, then the disappearance of giants might not have been a natural evolutionary process, but the result of systematic warfare and elimination. The suppression of evidence in modern times might represent a continuation of this ancient pattern, ensuring that knowledge of these lost populations remains hidden. But suppression becomes increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and independent research. Social media platforms allow researchers to share discoveries that would never appear in mainstream academic publications. DNA analysis techniques are becoming more accessible to private laboratories that aren't bound by institutional policies. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies can detect buried remains without requiring official excavation permits. The evidence continues to accumulate despite institutional resistance. Photographs of giant excavations from the 19th century circulate online, preserved by local historical societies and private collectors. Genetic analyses of ancient remains sometimes reveal markers that don't match any known human populations. Construction projects occasionally uncover burial sites containing skeletal remains of unusual size, before being quickly sealed off by archaeological authorities. Independent researchers are beginning to connect these scattered pieces of evidence into a coherent picture. The megalithic monuments, the suppressed skeletal remains, the ancient texts describing giants, and the engineering impossibilities that conventional archaeology can't explain all point toward the same conclusion. Human history includes chapters that have been deliberately hidden from public view. This hidden history suggests possibilities that mainstream science isn't prepared to acknowledge. If giants once existed and built the megalithic monuments, it means that human potential extends far beyond current limitations. The capabilities demonstrated by these ancient builders, their ability to move massive stones with precision and align their constructions with celestial accuracy, might be recoverable through understanding the conditions that originally made them possible. Modern humans, despite our technological sophistication, have lost touch with capabilities that our ancestors took for granted. We've become dependent on machines to accomplish tasks that giants might have performed with their bare hands. We've replaced direct astronomical observation with computer calculations, losing the intuitive understanding of celestial mechanics that guided ancient builders. But this dependence isn't irreversible. If the genetic potential for extraordinary size and strength still exists within human populations, if the knowledge encoded in megalithic monuments can be decoded and understood, if the environmental conditions that once supported giant populations can be identified and recreated, then the capabilities we've lost might be recoverable. The megalithic monuments themselves might be the key to this recovery. Their precise alignments, mathematical relationships, and acoustic properties suggest that they were designed not just as impressive architecture, but as functional devices for purposes we don't yet understand. Some researchers propose that these structures were built to harness and focus natural energies, to create conditions that enhanced human development, or to serve as educational tools for transmitting advanced knowledge across generations. If these theories are correct, then the monuments aren't just reminders of lost capabilities, but blueprints for recovering them. The astronomical alignments might indicate optimal times for human development. The acoustic properties might create frequencies that stimulate genetic expression. The mathematical relationships might encode formulas for recreating the conditions that originally produced giant populations. This possibility transforms our relationship with these ancient sites from passive observation to active investigation. Instead of simply marveling at achievements we can't explain, we should be studying them as instruction manuals for recovering lost human potential. The stones aren't just monuments to the past, they're guidebooks for the future. The implications extend beyond individual human development to the future of our species. If giants once existed and built these monuments, if their capabilities were naturally occurring variations within human genetics rather than supernatural interventions, then similar variations might be possible again. Environmental changes, genetic therapies, or other interventions might allow future human populations to achieve sizes and capabilities that we currently consider impossible. we might be living at the lowest point in a cycle of human capability, surrounded by monuments built during a previous peak that we're only beginning to understand. The megalithic sites, rather than being mysterious anomalies from our primitive past, might be sophisticated achievements from our advanced past, waiting for us to develop sufficient understanding to appreciate their true purpose. This perspective changes everything about how we view human potential and our relationship to the ancient world. We're not the pinnacle of human development, looking back at primitive ancestors who somehow accomplished impossible feats. We're potentially the nadir of a cycle, surrounded by achievements that demonstrate capabilities we've lost but might someday recover. The giants who built the megalithic monuments might not be extinct. They might be dormant, waiting for the right conditions to emerge again from within human populations that have forgotten their own potential. The stones remember what we've been taught to forget, and they're waiting patiently for us to remember who we really are and what we're truly capable of achieving. But this remembering requires courage. It means acknowledging that our understanding of human history is fundamentally incomplete. It means questioning institutional narratives that have shaped our worldview for generations. It means accepting that the evidence carved in stone might be more reliable than the theories written in textbooks. Most challenging of all, it means embracing the possibility that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, that the capabilities we consider supernatural might actually be natural variations within our species, waiting for the right conditions to manifest once again. The megalithic monuments stand as permanent invitations to this remembering, challenging us to look beyond conventional explanations and embrace the extraordinary possibilities that our own history reveals. The choice is ours. We can continue to accept inadequate explanations that require us to ignore obvious impossibilities, or we can open our minds to evidence that suggests human history is far stranger and more wonderful than we've been taught. The stones have been patient for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer for us to find the courage to hear what they've been trying to tell us all along. The truth becomes undeniable when you stand in the shadow of Puma Punku, high on the Altiplano of Bolivia, where the air is so thin that every breath feels laboured and the landscape stretches endlessly towards snow-capped peaks. Here, at over 12,000 feet above sea level, you encounter stonework so precise it seems to mock our modern capabilities. These aren't roughly hewn blocks stacked by ambitious farmers. These are architectural components machined to tolerances that would challenge today's computer-controlled cutting systems. Andesite blocks weighing hundreds of tons, carved with interlocking joints so complex they appear designed by aerospace engineers. Surfaces so flat and smooth they reflect light like mirrors. Angles so perfect they measure exactly 90 degrees to fractions that our most sensitive instruments can barely detect. I've brought modern stonemasons to this site, craftsmen who've spent their entire careers working with stone. They run their hands along these surfaces in stunned silence. They examine the joints with magnifying glasses, searching for tool marks that simply aren't there. They measure the angles with precision instruments and shake their heads in disbelief. These are men who understand stone, who know its limitations and possibilities. And they all reach the same conclusion. This work is impossible. Not difficult, not challenging, impossible. The hardest stone known to ancient South Americans was bronze, an alloy that dulls quickly against andesite, one of the hardest volcanic rocks on Earth. Yet these blocks show no evidence of the pecking, grinding or chiseling that bronze tools would necessarily leave behind. Instead, they display surfaces that appear to have been shaped by methods we can't identify, using tools we can't imagine. But the precision of the cutting is only the beginning of the mystery. How are these massive blocks transported to this remote mountaintop location? The nearest quarry sites are dozens of miles away across some of the most challenging terrain on the planet. Deep valleys, razor-sharp ridges and slopes so steep that modern roads require switchbacks just to navigate them. Moving blocks weighing 400 tons across this landscape would challenge the largest cranes and transporters in existence today. Yet somehow, using technology that archaeology insists was limited to rope, wooden rollers, and human muscle power, ancient builders moved these architectural components across impossible terrain and assembled them into structures so precise that the joints between blocks are virtually invisible. The mainstream explanation requires us to believe that pre-Columbian peoples, working at oxygen-depleting altitudes with primitive tools, consistently achieved results that strain our modern capabilities, that they developed techniques so advanced they surpass contemporary engineering, then inexplicably forgot these methods without leaving any record of how they were accomplished. This explanation becomes even more strained when you examine the site's layout and design. Puma Punku wasn't built haphazardly. It follows sophisticated geometric principles, with structures aligned to cardinal directions and astronomical events. The precision required to maintain these alignments while working with such massive components suggests mathematical knowledge and surveying capabilities that supposedly didn't exist in pre-Columbian America. But what if the builders weren't working within the same physical limitations that constrain ordinary humans? What if they possessed strength and capabilities that made moving massive stones not just possible but practical? The skeletal evidence, though systematically suppressed, provides compelling support for this possibility. Throughout the Andean region, archaeological excavations have uncovered human remains of extraordinary size, skulls with cranial capacity significantly larger than modern humans, femur bones indicating heights well over 8 feet, pelvic structures scaled for beings of enormous stature. These discoveries follow a familiar pattern: initial excavation and documentation by qualified archaeologists, submission of findings to major institutions for further study, then systematic disappearance of the physical evidence, leaving only photographs, measurements, and reports that mainstream archaeology prefers to ignore. In 1928, French archaeologist Henri de Créqui-Montfort excavated a burial site near Lake Titicaca that yielded skeletal remains of individuals measuring over 9 feet in height. His detailed photographs and measurements were published in European archaeological journals, attracting significant scientific attention. When researchers in the 1980s attempted to locate these specimens for modern DNA analysis, they were informed that the materials had been lost during World War II, destroyed in bombing raids that conveniently eliminated evidence that didn't fit established narratives. Similar patterns emerged from sites throughout South America. The Smithsonian Institution's early expeditions to the region documented numerous discoveries of giant human remains, but these specimens consistently vanish from institutional collections. Private collectors sometimes acquire such materials through estate sales or black market antiquities dealers, but academic institutions deny these finds any legitimacy, dismissing them as hoaxes or misidentifications. This systematic suppression extends beyond skeletal remains to artifacts scaled for beings of enormous size. At sites throughout the Andes, archaeologists occasionally uncover tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects that are simply too large for ordinary humans to use effectively. Spear points weighing several pounds each, hammers with handles designed for hands twice the size of normal humans, ceremonial masks and headdresses scaled for heads significantly larger than any modern human population. These artifacts disappear into museum storage facilities where they are categorized as ceremonial items or artistic exaggerations rather than functional tools. The possibility that they were designed for beings who actually possess the size and strength to use them is never seriously considered in official reports. Yet the evidence persists in places where institutional control is less absolute. Local museums in remote areas sometimes display artifacts and photographs that major institutions prefer to ignore. Indigenous communities preserve oral traditions describing encounters with giant beings, accounts that align remarkably with the archaeological evidence that mainstream science dismisses. The Aymara people of the Altiplano have detailed oral histories describing the builders of Puma Punku as beings of extraordinary stature and strength. According to these traditions, the giants possessed knowledge of stoneworking techniques that allowed them to shape the hardest rocks as easily as ordinary humans work with clay. They could transport massive blocks across great distances using methods that seemed magical to smaller human observers. These oral traditions consistently describe the giants not as mythological creatures, but as real beings who lived alongside human populations for extended periods. The accounts detail their appearance, their capabilities, their social structures, and their eventual disappearance from the region. The specificity and consistency of these descriptions across different communities and time periods suggest they're preserving historical memories rather than creating folklore, but perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from engineering analysis of the structures themselves. Computer modelling of the forces required to quarry, transport and position the blocks at Puma Punku reveal stress loads that would require multiple individuals of exceptional strength working in perfect coordination. The lifting capacity needed to position some of the largest blocks exceeds what teams of ordinary humans could generate, even with sophisticated mechanical assistance. However, beings of giant stature could accomplish these tasks using techniques that would be impossible for smaller humans. Their increased reach would provide leverage advantages that would multiply their effective strength. Their larger hands could grip and manipulate blocks that ordinary humans couldn't even wrap their fingers around. Their enhanced body mass would provide the stability needed to position massive stones with millimeter precision. The acoustic properties of Puma Punku provide another clue to its builder's identity. The site demonstrates sophisticated understanding of sound propagation and resonance that suggests advanced knowledge of physics and mathematics. Specific locations within the complex amplify voices and musical instruments in ways that create powerful emotional and psychological effects. Testing these acoustic properties reveals that they're optimized for voices in a lower frequency range than typical human speech. The resonant frequencies suggest the structures were designed for beings with larger vocal cords and lung capacity than ordinary humans possess. Giants, with their proportionally larger respiratory systems, would naturally produce sounds in the frequency ranges that these structures enhance most effectively. This acoustic evidence aligns with ancient accounts describing giant beings as possessing voices of extraordinary power and resonance. Biblical descriptions of giants often emphasize their vocal capabilities alongside their physical strength. Similar accounts appear in mythologies worldwide, suggesting that enhanced vocal abilities were a consistent characteristic of these populations. The mathematical relationships embedded in Puma Punku's design reveal knowledge that supposedly didn't exist in pre-Columbian America. The proportions of the structures encode sophisticated geometric principles that weren't formally described by European mathematicians until centuries after the site's construction. The alignments demonstrate understanding of astronomical cycles that require precise observation and calculation over extended time periods. This mathematical sophistication suggests builders with intellectual capabilities that match their physical advantages. The enlarged cranial capacities observed in giant skeletal remains indicate brain volumes significantly larger than modern humans. Increased brain size doesn't automatically translate to increased intelligence, but it suggests the potential for enhanced cognitive abilities. Giants with both physical and intellectual advantages could have developed mathematical and astronomical knowledge millennia ahead of ordinary human populations. Their longer lifespans, suggested by ancient accounts, would have allowed them to accumulate observational data over time periods that would span multiple generations of smaller humans. The precision required to encode mathematical relationships into massive stone structures while maintaining astronomical alignments demands capabilities that exceed those of ordinary ancient peoples. It requires builders who could conceptualize complex geometric relationships, perform precise calculations, and execute construction plans with extraordinary accuracy. But if giants possessed these capabilities and built structures like Puma Punku, what happened to them? The archaeological evidence suggests their disappearance was neither gradual nor natural. Sites throughout the region show signs of deliberate destruction, as if someone actively sought to eliminate traces of giant populations and their achievements. Ancient accounts describe conflicts between giants and smaller human populations, wars that ended with the giants being defeated or driven away. The Spanish conquistadors recorded indigenous traditions about previous inhabitants of enormous size who had been eliminated in ancient wars. These accounts, dismissed as mythology by colonial authorities, might actually be historical memories of real conflicts between different human populations. The systematic suppression of giant remains in modern times might represent a continuation of this ancient pattern. If institutional authorities believed that acknowledging the existence of giants would be socially or politically disruptive, they would have powerful motivations to ensure such evidence remains hidden from public view. But suppression becomes increasingly difficult as independent researchers develop new methods for detecting and documenting anomalous discoveries. Ground-penetrating radar can identify buried structures and remains without requiring official excavation permits. DNA analysis techniques allow private laboratories to examine genetic material from ancient specimens. Digital photography and social media platforms enable rapid dissemination of evidence that would otherwise disappear into institutional storage. The cumulative weight of this evidence, despite decades of systematic suppression, builds an overwhelming case for the historical existence of giant human populations. When combined with the engineering impossibilities presented by sites like Puma Punku, it suggests that our understanding of ancient human capabilities is fundamentally incomplete. The precision stonework, the massive transportation requirements, the mathematical sophistication, and the acoustic properties of these sites all point toward builders whose abilities far exceeded those of ordinary ancient peoples. The systematic suppression of skeletal evidence indicating the existence of such builders suggests that mainstream archaeology is actively avoiding conclusions that would require fundamental revisions to accepted historical narratives. But the stones don't lie, and they don't disappear as easily as skeletal remains or documentary evidence. The blocks at Puma Punku remain as permanent testimony to capabilities that officially never existed. Their impossible precision stands as a challenge to every conventional explanation, demanding acknowledgement of truths that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden. The time has come to listen to what the stones are telling us, to acknowledge that the engineering achievements we see at sites like Puma Punku weren't accomplished by ordinary humans using primitive techniques, but by beings whose physical and intellectual capabilities allowed them to work stone as easily as we work with modern materials. The evidence is carved in andesite harder than steel, measured in tolerances tighter than machine specifications, and preserved in acoustic properties that resonate with voices we can no longer hear. The giants who built Puma Punku left us a message written in stone, a permanent record of capabilities that challenge our understanding of human potential. But reading that message requires courage. It means acknowledging that mainstream archaeology has been fundamentally wrong about human history. It means accepting that our ancestors shared the world with beings whose achievements make our modern accomplishments seem modest by comparison. It means embracing the possibility that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, waiting for the right conditions to manifest once again. The choice is ours, but the stones won't wait forever for us to find the courage to hear their message. The mathematics encoded in these ancient structures reveal knowledge that challenges everything we thought we understood about prehistoric capabilities. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, stone pillars arranged in perfect circles demonstrate understanding of geometric principles that weren't supposed to exist 11,600 years ago. The site predates agriculture, predates pottery, predates metal tools, yet its builders possessed mathematical knowledge sophisticated enough to create precise astronomical alignments that track celestial movements across thousands of years. This isn't primitive guesswork elevated by modern interpretation. These are deliberate calculations embedded in stone, requiring builders who understood complex mathematical relationships and possessed the intellectual capacity to implement them on a massive scale. The precision is so exact that modern astronomers use these alignments to calibrate ancient astronomical events, treating structures built by supposedly primitive peoples as more accurate than many contemporary instruments. Consider the implications. Mathematical knowledge of this sophistication doesn't develop overnight. It requires generations of accumulated observation, systematic record-keeping, and intellectual traditions capable of preserving and building upon previous discoveries. Yet the archaeological record shows no evidence of the gradual development that such knowledge would require. Instead, we find mathematical sophistication appearing fully formed as if inherited from an earlier source. The builders of Göbekli Tepe possessed knowledge that ordinary hunter-gatherer populations couldn't have developed independently. They understood celestial mechanics, geometric principles, and mathematical relationships that required intellectual capabilities far beyond what we associate with Stone Age peoples. Unless, of course, they weren't ordinary Stone Age peoples at all. The cranial evidence, though systematically suppressed, suggests exactly this possibility. Skulls discovered at sites throughout the Middle East and Anatolia show significantly larger brain capacities than modern human populations. These aren't pathological conditions or artificial deformations, but natural variations that indicate beings whose intellectual capabilities might have matched their extraordinary physical attributes. Dr. Brian Foerster's analysis of elongated skulls from Peru revealed cranial volumes up to 25% larger than modern humans, with structural differences that suggest they belong to a distinct population rather than artificially modified normal skulls. DNA analysis of these specimens, when permitted to proceed, often yields results that don't match any known human populations, genetic markers that appear to represent an unknown branch of the human family tree, one that possessed both physical and intellectual advantages over ordinary humans. But this evidence consistently disappears from institutional collections or is dismissed as contaminated samples and laboratory errors. The possibility that ancient human populations included beings with naturally enhanced cognitive abilities is never seriously considered in mainstream academic publications. Yet the mathematical evidence carved in stone demands exactly this conclusion. The precision required to encode complex geometric relationships into massive megalithic structures while maintaining astronomical alignments across millennia suggests builders whose intellectual capabilities exceeded those of ordinary ancient peoples by orders of magnitude. At New Grange in Ireland, built over 5,000 years ago, a narrow passage tomb is aligned so precisely with the winter solstice that sunlight penetrates the chamber for exactly 17 minutes on the shortest day of the year. This alignment has remained accurate for over 50 centuries, despite the gradual shift in Earth's axial tilt that affects all astronomical observations over such extended time periods. The builders of Newgrange didn't just understand current astronomical conditions. They possessed knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes star positions to shift over centuries. They could calculate how these shifts would affect their alignments over thousands of years and compensate for them in their original construction. This level of astronomical sophistication requires mathematical knowledge that wasn't supposed to exist until the development of modern astronomy. Similar precision appears at megalithic sites worldwide. The Great Circle at Avebury encompasses exactly 28.5 acres, a measurement that encodes multiple mathematical relationships including pi, the golden ratio, and astronomical cycles. Stonehenge incorporates 56 Aubrey holes arranged in a pattern that tracks the 18.6-year lunar cycle with precision that allows accurate prediction of eclipses decades in advance. These aren't coincidental relationships discovered by modern researchers reading meaning into ancient structures. They're deliberate mathematical encodings that require builders who understood these principles and possessed the intellectual sophistication to implement them in permanent stone monuments. The conventional explanation requires us to believe that Stone Age peoples, working without writing systems, mathematical notation, or precision instruments, consistently achieved mathematical accuracy that challenges our modern capabilities, that they developed astronomical knowledge requiring centuries of systematic observation without leaving any record of how this knowledge was accumulated or transmitted between generations. This explanation becomes even more strained when you consider the global distribution of these mathematical encodings. Sites separated by thousands of miles and constructed across different time periods all demonstrate similar levels of mathematical sophistication. The likelihood that isolated populations independently developed identical advanced mathematical knowledge approaches zero, unless the builders weren't isolated populations but representatives of a single, highly advanced civilization. Beings whose intellectual capabilities allowed them to develop sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge, then disseminate it across the globe through coordinated construction projects that spanned continents and millennia. The physical evidence supports this interpretation. Giant skeletal remains discovered at megalithic sites worldwide show consistent characteristics: enlarged cranial capacities, elongated limb bones, and structural features that suggest beings designed for both intellectual and physical tasks requiring extraordinary capabilities. At the Serpent Mound in Ohio, excavations in the 1800s uncovered skeletal remains of individuals measuring over 8 feet in height, with skull measurements indicating brain volume significantly larger than modern humans. These specimens were documented by the Smithsonian Institution before disappearing from institutional collections under circumstances that remain unexplained. Similar discoveries at Cahokia, Spiro Mounds, and dozens of other North American sites follow the same pattern. Initial documentation by qualified archaeologists, submission to major institutions for study, then systematic disappearance of the physical evidence. Only photographs, measurements, and written reports remain, providing tantalizing glimpses of populations whose existence challenges conventional narratives. The mathematical knowledge demonstrated at these sites aligns with the intellectual capabilities suggested by the enlarged cranial capacities. Cahokia's urban planning incorporates sophisticated geometric principles and astronomical alignments that require advanced mathematical understanding. The site's layout encodes relationships between solar and lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and stellar movements that demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics far beyond what ordinary ancient peoples supposedly possessed. But acknowledging this evidence requires confronting the systematic suppression that has shaped our understanding of ancient human capabilities. Academic institutions have powerful incentives to maintain established narratives, rather than investigating discoveries that would require fundamental revisions to accepted theories. The suppression isn't limited to physical evidence. Mathematical analyses of megalithic sites that reveal advanced knowledge are often dismissed as numerological speculation or coincidental relationships. Researchers who publish findings suggesting ancient mathematical sophistication find their work marginalized, their funding reduced, and their academic careers threatened. Dr. Alexander Thom's groundbreaking research on megalithic mathematics in the 1960s and 70s documented sophisticated geometric principles embedded in stone circles throughout Britain and Europe. His measurements revealed that ancient builders used standardized units of measurement, understood complex mathematical relationships, and could implement these principles with extraordinary precision across sites separated by hundreds of miles. Thom's work was initially acclaimed by the archaeological community, but as its implications became clear, academic support evaporated. Subsequent researchers found their access to sites restricted, their funding applications denied, and their publications rejected by mainstream journals. The mathematical evidence that Thom documented remains valid, but institutional resistance prevents its implications from being seriously considered in academic circles. This pattern of initial acceptance followed by systematic suppression appears repeatedly when researchers document evidence of advanced ancient capabilities. The mathematical knowledge embedded in megalithic sites is undeniable, but its implications for our understanding of ancient human populations are too disruptive to be acknowledged within existing institutional frameworks. Independent researchers working outside academic institutions continue to document mathematical relationships in ancient structures that demonstrate knowledge far beyond what conventional archaeology attributes to prehistoric peoples. These findings circulate through online networks and private publications, building a body of evidence that mainstream institutions prefer to ignore. But the mathematics doesn't disappear as easily as skeletal remains or documentary evidence. The geometric relationships are permanent features of the structures themselves, carved in stone and preserved for anyone willing to make the necessary measurements. The astronomical alignments continue to function exactly as their builders intended, providing ongoing demonstrations of ancient mathematical precision. Modern computer analysis reveals mathematical relationships in megalithic structures that human researchers might miss through visual inspection alone. Digital mapping techniques can detect geometric patterns and proportional relationships with precision that exceeds what ancient builders could have achieved through trial and error or fortunate accident. These computer analyses consistently reveal mathematical sophistication that challenges conventional explanations. The builders of megalithic sites possessed knowledge of advanced geometric principles, understanding of complex mathematical relationships, and ability to implement these concepts in permanent stone structures that continue to demonstrate their precision thousands of years later. The mathematical evidence, combined with the suppressed skeletal remains and the engineering impossibilities presented by megalithic construction techniques, builds a compelling case for ancient human populations whose capabilities far exceeded those of ordinary prehistoric peoples. The consistency of this evidence across different continents and time periods suggests coordinated efforts by beings whose intellectual and physical advantages allowed them to achieve results that we struggle to explain, let alone replicate. Yet mainstream archaeology continues to attribute these achievements to ordinary humans using primitive techniques. This attribution requires ignoring obvious mathematical sophistication, dismissing clear evidence of advanced capabilities, and maintaining institutional policies that prevent honest investigation of anomalous discoveries. The time has come to acknowledge what the mathematical evidence demonstrates. The megalithic monuments weren't built by primitive peoples stumbling towards civilization through trial and error. They were constructed by beings whose intellectual capabilities allowed them to understand and implement mathematical principles that we're only now beginning to appreciate. The mathematics embedded in stone speaks of minds that could conceive complex relationships, perform precise calculations, and execute construction plans that would challenge our modern capabilities. These weren't ordinary ancient humans working with primitive tools and limited knowledge. These were giants, beings whose enhanced cranial capacities provided the intellectual foundation for mathematical achievements that continue to inspire awe thousands of years after their creation. The numbers don't lie, even when institutions prefer to ignore their implications. The mathematical relationships are permanent features of the monuments themselves, waiting patiently for us to develop sufficient understanding to appreciate their true significance. They stand as testimony to capabilities that officially never existed, challenging us to expand our understanding of human potential and acknowledge the extraordinary achievements of our forgotten ancestors. In our next investigation, we'll explore how these mathematical principles were implemented in the actual construction processes, examining the engineering techniques that allowed ancient builders to achieve precision that rivals modern machine tolerances. We'll investigate the tools and methods that could account for the mathematical accuracy we observe and ask whether conventional explanations can adequately account for the evidence carved in stone before our eyes, because the mathematics is just the beginning. The real mystery lies in how beings whose existence has been systematically denied managed to transform abstract mathematical knowledge into physical monuments that continue to demonstrate their builders' extraordinary capabilities thousands of years after their completion. The precision we observe at these ancient sites extends far beyond mathematical relationships into the realm of practical engineering that challenges our fundamental assumptions about prehistoric capabilities. When you examine the actual construction techniques used at megalithic sites, you encounter methodologies that shouldn't have existed thousands of years before the supposed development of advanced engineering principles. At the ancient site of Ollantaytambo in Peru, massive granite blocks weighing over 50 tons each are positioned with such exactness that the joints between them measure less than 1 millimeter in width. This isn't rough stonework held together by mortar and hope. These are precision-fitted components that interlock with tolerances that would be impressive even by today's manufacturing standards. Modern attempts to replicate this level of precision using tools available to ancient peoples have failed consistently. Teams of skilled stonemasons working with reconstructed bronze implements and following techniques described in archaeological literature cannot achieve joints tighter than several millimeters. The precision observed at sites like Ollantaytambo requires cutting accuracy that exceeds what bronze tools can accomplish, especially when working with materials as hard as granite. The surfaces of these blocks show no evidence of the pecking, grinding, or chiseling that conventional tools would necessarily leave behind. Instead, they display finishes so smooth they appear to have been polished by industrial machinery. Under microscopic examination, the stone surfaces reveal crystalline structures that remain intact, suggesting cutting methods that didn't generate the heat and friction associated with traditional stoneworking techniques. Dr. Christopher Dunn, a precision machinist with decades of experience in aerospace manufacturing, has analysed core samples from ancient Egyptian granite work and found evidence of cutting techniques that parallel modern industrial processes. The tool marks, or rather the absence of expected tool marks, suggest methodologies that we don't associate with ancient civilizations. Dunn's analysis reveals cutting patterns consistent with high-speed rotating tools, possibly diamond-tip devices capable of maintaining precision across extended cutting operations. The uniformity of the cuts, the absence of chatter marks, and the preservation of crystalline structures all point toward advanced manufacturing techniques that conventional archaeology insists didn't exist in the ancient world. But these findings consistently disappear from mainstream archaeological discussions. Dunn's peer-reviewed papers documenting advanced ancient machining techniques are ignored by major archaeological journals, dismissed as speculative interpretations of natural weathering patterns. The physical evidence he presents is categorized as anomalous rather than indicative of systematic advanced capabilities. This pattern of dismissal extends to similar discoveries at sites worldwide. In Egypt, the granite boxes in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid display internal corners with radii so small and consistent that they suggest machine boring rather than hand carving. The precision required to maintain these tolerances while removing tons of granite from the interior of massive blocks exceeds what ancient peoples could have accomplished using copper tools and abrasives. Yet mainstream Egyptology continues to attribute these achievements to patient craftsmen working with simple tools over extended time periods. This explanation requires us to ignore the obvious precision of the work and trust that somehow ancient peoples consistently achieved results that challenge our modern manufacturing capabilities. The transportation methods used to move these precisely cut blocks present additional engineering mysteries that conventional explanations cannot adequately address. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the trilithon stones weighing over 800 tons each were not only quarried and transported but lifted to a height of 20 feet and positioned with joints so tight that you cannot insert a knife blade between them. Modern engineering analysis reveals that moving objects of this weight requires specialized equipment that didn't supposedly exist in ancient times. The largest mobile cranes available today can lift approximately 200 tons, but only straight up and only for very short distances. Moving 800-ton blocks across a mile of uneven terrain, then lifting them 20 feet into the air and positioning them with millimeter precision would challenge our most advanced construction capabilities. The conventional explanation relies on ramps, rollers, and human labor. But engineering calculations reveal that moving an 800-ton block using these methods would require ramps with gradients so gradual they would extend for miles in each direction. The amount of material needed to construct such ramps would exceed the volume of the stones being moved, creating logistical problems that multiply exponentially with each block. Furthermore, positioning blocks of this weight with the precision observed at Baalbek requires fine control that ramps and rollers cannot provide. Moving a multi-hundred-ton object into exact position, using only human muscle power and primitive mechanical advantage is essentially impossible. The margin for error is so small that any miscalculation would result in irreparable damage to the structure. Yet the precision achieved at sites like Baalbek suggests that the builders possessed methods for moving and positioning massive blocks that we don't understand. The joints between the trilithon stones are so exact that they appear to have been machined rather than hand-fitted. The alignment of the blocks maintains tolerances that would be challenging to achieve even with modern construction equipment. Archaeological experiments attempting to demonstrate ancient construction techniques consistently fail to achieve the precision observed at actual megalithic sites. Teams using reconstructed ancient tools and methods can move small stones short distances, but they cannot replicate the accuracy and scale of positioning found at sites like Baalbek, Sacsayhuamán, or Ollantaytambo. The disparity between experimental results and actual ancient achievements suggests that our understanding of ancient construction capabilities is fundamentally incomplete. Either the builders possessed techniques that we haven't identified, or they had access to capabilities that exceed what we associate with prehistoric populations. The acoustic properties of megalithic sites provide additional evidence of advanced engineering knowledge. At sites throughout the world, stone structures demonstrate sophisticated understanding of sound propagation, resonance, and frequency manipulation that requires knowledge of physics principles not formally described until modern times. The chamber beneath the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan resonates at specific frequencies that create powerful psychological effects on human consciousness. Modern acoustic analysis reveals that the chamber's dimensions and construction materials are precisely calibrated to enhance certain sound frequencies while dampening others. This level of acoustic engineering requires understanding of wave mechanics, harmonic relationships, and psychoacoustic principles that supposedly didn't exist in ancient Mesoamerica. Similar acoustic phenomena appear at megalithic sites worldwide. The stone circles of Britain and Ireland often demonstrate resonant properties that amplify human voices at specific frequencies. The chambers within Newgrange in Ireland are tuned to enhance low-frequency sounds, creating acoustic effects that can induce altered states of consciousness in human observers. These acoustic properties aren't accidental byproducts of construction techniques designed for other purposes. They represent deliberate engineering choices that required understanding of complex physical principles and the ability to implement them in permanent stone structures. The consistency of these effects across different sites and cultures suggests shared knowledge of acoustic engineering principles, but mainstream archaeology attributes these phenomena to fortunate accidents or post hoc interpretations by modern researchers seeking meaning in ancient structures. The possibility that prehistoric peoples possessed systematic understanding of acoustic principles is rarely considered in academic publications, despite mounting evidence that these effects were deliberately engineered into megalithic monuments. The suppression of acoustic evidence follows the same pattern we've observed with other anomalous discoveries. Initial documentation by qualified researchers, publication in specialized journals, then systematic marginalization as the implications become clear. Researchers who document advanced acoustic properties at ancient sites find their work dismissed as speculative, or their access to sites restricted by archaeological authorities. Dr. Paul Devereux's pioneering research on archaeoacoustics revealed sophisticated sound engineering at megalithic sites throughout Europe. His measurements documented resonant frequencies, acoustic focusing effects, and harmonic relationships that demonstrate advanced understanding of sound physics. Yet his findings are rarely cited in mainstream archaeological literature, relegated to specialized publications that most researchers ignore. This marginalization serves to maintain conventional narratives about ancient capabilities, while avoiding confrontation with evidence that demands fundamental revisions to accepted theories. The acoustic properties of megalithic sites are undeniable physical phenomena, but acknowledging their significance would require admitting that prehistoric peoples possessed knowledge that we are only now beginning to understand. Independent researchers continue to document acoustic anomalies at ancient sites worldwide, building a body of evidence that demonstrates systematic engineering knowledge far beyond what conventional archaeology attributes to prehistoric populations. These findings circulate through online networks and specialized publications, creating an alternative understanding of ancient capabilities that mainstream institutions prefer to ignore. The engineering evidence, like the mathematical relationships we examined earlier, doesn't disappear as easily as skeletal remains or documentary records. The precision is embedded in the structures themselves, measurable by anyone with appropriate instruments and the willingness to acknowledge what the measurements reveal. Modern laser scanning technology can document the precision of ancient stonework with accuracy that exceeds what the original builders could have measured directly. These scans consistently reveal tolerances that match or exceed modern manufacturing standards, achieved using techniques that we can't identify or replicate. Digital analysis of joint patterns, surface finishes, and acoustic properties provides objective data that challenges conventional explanations of ancient construction capabilities. The evidence is quantifiable, reproducible, and undeniably real. The only question is whether we have the intellectual honesty to acknowledge what it means. The builders of megalithic monuments possessed engineering knowledge and construction capabilities that far exceeded what we associate with prehistoric peoples. They could cut stone with precision that rivals modern machining, move massive blocks with accuracy that challenges our heavy construction equipment, and engineer acoustic properties that demonstrate understanding of advanced physics principles. This wasn't primitive trial-and-error construction gradually refined over generations. This was sophisticated engineering implemented by beings whose capabilities allowed them to achieve results that we struggle to explain let alone duplicate. The precision embedded in stone provides permanent testimony to abilities that officially never existed. The question isn't whether these capabilities existed. The evidence carved in stone makes that undeniable. The question is who possessed them, how they developed such advanced knowledge, and why their achievements have been attributed to ordinary humans using primitive techniques. The systematic suppression of evidence suggesting advanced ancient capabilities serves to maintain comfortable narratives about human progress while avoiding uncomfortable questions about our understanding of the past. But the engineering precision remains, waiting patiently in stone for us to develop sufficient honesty to acknowledge what it represents. These monuments weren't built by our ancestors as we understand them. They were constructed by beings whose engineering capabilities exceeded our own, whose knowledge of physics and mathematics allowed them to achieve precision that we can measure but cannot replicate. The time has come to acknowledge what the stones have been telling us all along. The precision isn't just impressive for its time, it's impressive for any time, including our own. And that recognition changes everything about how we understand the beings who created these permanent testimonies to capabilities that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human potential and ancient achievement. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this engineering evidence is how systematically it's been ignored or explained away by institutions that should be celebrating these remarkable achievements. Instead of marveling at the engineering brilliance of our ancestors, mainstream archaeology has chosen to diminish their accomplishments by attributing them to primitive techniques that couldn't possibly achieve the results we observe. This systematic minimization of ancient achievements serves a specific purpose. It maintains the narrative of linear human progress, while avoiding questions that would require fundamental revisions to our understanding of prehistoric capabilities. But the engineering evidence won't be minimized or explained away. It stands as permanent challenge to anyone willing to measure what the ancients built and honestly assess what those measurements mean. The implications of this engineering precision extend far beyond archaeology into the realm of human consciousness itself. When you stand before these monuments, when you run your hands along surfaces cut to tolerances that our modern tools can barely achieve, something fundamental shifts in your understanding of what's possible. These structures don't just challenge our academic theories, they challenge our entire conception of human limitations. Consider what this means for our species' potential. If beings with enhanced physical and cognitive capabilities once walked this earth, if they possessed knowledge and skills that we've somehow lost, then human development isn't the steady upward climb we've been taught to believe. Instead, it suggests a cyclical pattern, where extraordinary capabilities emerge, flourish, and then disappear, leaving only stone monuments as evidence of what once was possible. The genetic implications are staggering. Modern DNA analysis, when permitted to proceed on anomalous skeletal remains, sometimes reveals markers that don't correspond to any known human populations. These genetic signatures suggest variations within the human family tree that mainstream science isn't prepared to acknowledge. What if the capacity for extraordinary size, strength, and cognitive ability isn't extinct but merely dormant, waiting for the right environmental conditions to express itself again? Recent discoveries in epigenetics demonstrate that environmental factors can activate or suppress genetic expressions across generations. The atmospheric composition, gravitational effects, or other planetary conditions that once supported populations of giants might have changed gradually, causing these genetic expressions to become dormant rather than disappear entirely. If those conditions could be identified and recreated, might we see the return of human capabilities that built the megalithic monuments? This possibility transforms our relationship with these ancient sites from passive observation to active investigation. Instead of simply marveling at achievements we can't explain, we should be studying these monuments as instruction manuals for recovering lost human potential. The astronomical alignments might indicate optimal environmental conditions for human development. The acoustic properties might generate frequencies that stimulate genetic expression. The mathematical relationships might encode formulas for recreating the conditions that originally produced giant populations. But accessing this potential requires confronting institutional resistance that goes far deeper than academic conservatism. The systematic suppression of evidence suggesting extraordinary human capabilities in the past serves to maintain not just historical narratives but contemporary power structures. If human potential extends far beyond current limitations, if ordinary people possess dormant capabilities that could rival those of ancient giants, the implications for social control become profound. Modern educational systems, healthcare institutions, and social structures are all built upon assumptions about human limitations that might be artificially imposed rather than naturally occurring. The discovery that our ancestors possessed capabilities we've been taught to consider impossible would force fundamental questions about why those abilities were lost and whether their disappearance was natural or deliberately engineered. Ancient texts from cultures worldwide describe conflicts between different human populations, wars that ended with the elimination of groups possessing extraordinary abilities. The biblical account of the destruction of the Nephilim, the Greek myths of wars between gods and titans, the Hindu descriptions of battles between different classes of beings, all share common elements that suggest these weren't mythological allegories, but historical memories of real conflicts between populations with different capabilities. If these accounts describe actual historical events, then the disappearance of giants might have been the result of systematic warfare designed to eliminate populations whose abilities posed a threat to emerging power structures. The victors in these ancient conflicts would have strong motivations to suppress evidence of their adversaries' capabilities, ensuring that knowledge of extraordinary human potential wouldn't inspire others to develop similar abilities. The modern suppression of giant skeletal remains and anomalous archaeological evidence might represent a continuation of this ancient pattern. Institutional authorities who understand the implications of acknowledging extraordinary human capabilities would have powerful reasons to ensure such evidence remains hidden from public awareness. But suppression becomes increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and independent research. Social media platforms allow rapid dissemination of evidence that would otherwise disappear into institutional storage. DNA analysis techniques are becoming accessible to private laboratories that aren't bound by academic policies. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies can detect buried structures and remains without requiring official permits. The evidence continues to accumulate despite institutional resistance. Photographs of giant excavations from the 19th century circulate online, preserved by local historical societies and private collectors. Genetic analyses of ancient remains sometimes yield results that don't match any known human populations. Construction projects occasionally uncover burial sites containing skeletal remains of unusual size, before being quickly sealed off by archaeological authorities. Independent researchers are beginning to connect these scattered discoveries into a coherent picture. The megalithic monuments, the suppressed skeletal evidence, the ancient texts describing giants, and the engineering impossibilities that conventional archaeology can't explain all point toward the same conclusion. Human history includes capabilities that have been systematically hidden from public view. This hidden history suggests possibilities that mainstream science isn't prepared to acknowledge. If giants once existed and built the megalithic monuments, it means human potential extends far beyond current limitations. The capabilities demonstrated by ancient builders, their ability to move massive stones with precision and align their constructions with celestial accuracy, might be recoverable through understanding the conditions that originally made them possible. The megalithic sites themselves might hold the keys to this recovery. Their precise alignments, mathematical relationships, and acoustic properties suggest they were designed not just as impressive architecture, but as functional devices for purposes we don't yet comprehend. Some researchers propose that these structures were built to harness and focus natural energies, to create conditions that enhanced human development, or to serve as educational tools for transmitting advanced knowledge across generations. If these theories prove correct, then the monuments aren't just reminders of lost capabilities, but active instruments for recovering them. The astronomical alignments might indicate optimal timing for human genetic expression. The acoustic chambers might generate frequencies that stimulate dormant genetic potentials. The mathematical encodings might contain formulas for recreating the environmental conditions that originally supported giant populations. Modern research into consciousness and human potential is beginning to validate some of these possibilities. Studies of meditation practitioners demonstrate that sustained acoustic environments can induce measurable changes in brain structure and function. Research into epigenetics shows that environmental factors can activate genetic expressions that remain dormant under normal conditions. Investigation of circadian rhythms reveals that astronomical cycles profoundly influence human physiology and development. The megalithic monuments, with their sophisticated understanding of acoustic properties, astronomical alignments, and mathematical relationships, might represent an ancient science of human development that we're only beginning to rediscover. Their builders might have understood principles of human potential that we've forgotten, encoding this knowledge in stone structures designed to survive the collapse of civilizations. But accessing this ancient knowledge requires more than academic study. It demands a fundamental shift in consciousness, a willingness to question not just historical narratives, but contemporary assumptions about human limitations. The giants who built these monuments didn't just possess physical advantages, they embodied a different relationship to human potential itself. Ancient accounts consistently describe giants not as brutish creatures, but as beings of wisdom and capability. They're portrayed as teachers, innovators, and masters of arts and sciences that ordinary humans couldn't comprehend. Their physical stature was matched by intellectual and spiritual development that allowed them to perceive and manipulate natural forces in ways that seemed magical to smaller human observers. This integration of physical, intellectual, and spiritual development might be the key to understanding both their capabilities and their eventual disappearance. If giants represented a more complete expression of human potential, their loss might reflect not just physical elimination, but a fragmentation of human development that separated body, mind, and spirit into isolated domains. Modern humans, despite our technological sophistication, might represent a diminished version of what our species is capable of becoming. We've developed powerful external technologies while losing touch with internal capabilities that our ancestors took for granted. We can build machines that move massive stones, but we've forgotten how to develop the physical and mental capacities that would make such machines unnecessary. The megalithic monuments stand as permanent invitations to this remembering. They challenge us to expand our understanding of human potential, to question limitations we've accepted as natural, and to explore possibilities that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden. The precision embedded in their construction, the knowledge encoded in their alignments, and the capabilities required for their creation all point toward human potentials that remain dormant within our species. But awakening these potentials requires more than individual effort. It demands collective recognition that our understanding of human history and human capability is fundamentally incomplete. The systematic suppression of evidence suggesting extraordinary ancient achievements serves to maintain artificial limitations on contemporary human development. The time has come to acknowledge what the stones have been telling us. The megalithic monuments weren't built by primitive peoples using crude techniques. They were created by beings who represented the full flowering of human potential, whose capabilities challenge our most basic assumptions about what's possible for our species. Their legacy lives on in stone, waiting for us to develop sufficient wisdom to appreciate their message. The monuments aren't just historical curiosities or archaeological mysteries. They're blueprints for human development, instruction manuals for recovering capabilities that we never truly lost but simply forgot how to access. The giants who built these structures left us more than impressive architecture. They left us a pathway back to our own extraordinary potential, encoded in alignments that track the movements of stars and embedded in proportions that echo the mathematical harmony of the universe itself. The question isn't whether we can recover these ancient capabilities. The question is whether we have the courage to try. Because hidden within each of us, dormant in our genetic code and waiting in the quantum field of consciousness itself, lies the same spark that once animated beings capable of moving mountains and aligning their creations with the cosmic order. The monuments stand as proof that this potential once expressed itself in physical reality. Their presence on our planet is a constant reminder that what was achieved before can be achieved again. The stones remember what we've been taught to forget, and they're waiting patiently for us to remember who we really are. The megalithic monuments scattered across our planet represent something far more significant than impressive ancient architecture. They stand as permanent testimony to a lost chapter of human history, one that challenges every comfortable assumption we've made about our species' development and potential. When you examine the totality of evidence, when you step back from institutional narratives and look at what the stones themselves are telling us, a pattern emerges that cannot be ignored or explained away. The precision stonework that exceeds modern manufacturing tolerances, the transportation of massive blocks across impossible terrain, the mathematical relationships embedded in structures built thousands of years before such knowledge supposedly existed, the acoustic properties that demonstrate understanding of advanced physics principles, the astronomical alignments that require centuries of systematic observation and calculation. None of this makes sense if attributed to ordinary humans using primitive techniques. But all of it becomes comprehensible when we acknowledge the possibility that these monuments were built by beings whose physical and intellectual capabilities far exceeded those of typical ancient populations. The skeletal evidence, though systematically suppressed, provides direct support for this conclusion. Remains of individuals measuring 8 to 10 feet in height, with cranial capacities significantly larger than modern humans, have been discovered at megalithic sites worldwide. These discoveries follow a consistent pattern: initial documentation by qualified archaeologists, submission to major institutions for study, then mysterious disappearance from collections and public access. This isn't accidental oversight. This is deliberate policy, implemented by institutions that understand the implications of acknowledging such discoveries. Because recognizing the existence of giant human populations in the past would require fundamental revisions to our understanding of human history, human potential, and the relationships between different populations sharing our planet. The ancient texts from cultures across the globe provide additional confirmation. Descriptions of giants appear consistently in the mythologies, and historical accounts of peoples who had no contact with each other, separated by oceans and millennia. These aren't random fairy tales or imaginative fiction. They're cultural memories, preserved accounts of encounters with beings whose capabilities seemed supernatural to ordinary human observers. The Hebrew Bible speaks of the Nephilim, mighty men of old who possessed extraordinary stature and abilities. Greek mythology describes titans who shaped the landscape and taught humans various arts and sciences. Hindu texts tell of giant beings who possessed advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Norse sagas speak of giants who built massive stone structures and understood forces that ordinary humans couldn't comprehend. When similar accounts appear independently across multiple cultures, we must consider the possibility that they're describing real historical events rather than coincidental mythological inventions. The consistency of these descriptions, combined with the archaeological evidence of giant remains and the engineering impossibilities presented by megalithic sites, builds a compelling case for the historical reality of extraordinary human populations. But accepting this evidence requires confronting uncomfortable questions about why these populations disappeared and why evidence of their existence has been systematically suppressed. The ancient text provides some clues, describing conflicts between giants and smaller human populations, wars that ended with the giants being defeated or eliminated. These accounts suggest that the disappearance of extraordinary human populations wasn't a natural evolutionary process, but the result of deliberate warfare and systematic elimination. If these conflicts actually occurred, if populations possessing extraordinary capabilities were systematically destroyed in ancient times, then the modern suppression of evidence supporting their existence makes perfect sense. Institutional authorities who understand the implications of acknowledging giant populations would have powerful motivations to ensure such evidence remains hidden from public awareness, because recognizing that beings of extraordinary capability once existed raises profound questions about human potential itself. If giants possessed abilities that we consider impossible, if they could accomplish feats that challenge our modern engineering capabilities, then human development isn't the steady upward progression we've been taught to believe. Instead, it suggests a cyclical pattern where extraordinary capabilities emerge, flourish, and then disappear, leaving only stone monuments as evidence of what was once possible. This cyclical view of human history aligns with ancient philosophical traditions from cultures worldwide. The Hindu concept of yugas describes recurring ages of varying human capability, with our current era representing a decline from previous periods of extraordinary achievement. Greek mythology speaks of golden, silver, bronze, and iron ages, each representing diminished capabilities compared to the previous era. These aren't just poetic metaphors, but potentially accurate descriptions of real historical cycles. The megalithic monuments might be remnants of a previous cycle, stone witnesses to capabilities that exceeded our current understanding. Their builders didn't just possess superior physical strength, they demonstrated intellectual sophistication that allowed them to encode complex mathematical relationships into permanent structures, create acoustic effects that influence human consciousness, and align their constructions with astronomical precision that requires understanding of celestial mechanics we're only now beginning to appreciate. But these capabilities weren't supernatural or magical. They were natural expressions of human potential, operating under conditions that no longer exist or have been artificially suppressed. The genetic markers found in anomalous ancient remains suggest that the capacity for extraordinary size and enhanced cognitive ability might still exist within human DNA, dormant but not extinct. Recent advances in epigenetics demonstrate that environmental factors can activate or suppress genetic expressions across generations. The atmospheric composition, gravitational effects, or other planetary conditions that once supported populations of giants might have changed, causing these genetic potentials to become inactive rather than disappear entirely. Understanding these conditions could potentially allow for the reactivation of dormant human capabilities. Modern research into human consciousness and development is beginning to validate some of these possibilities. Studies of meditation practitioners show that sustained practice can produce measurable changes in brain structure and cognitive capability. Research into nutrition and environmental factors demonstrates that human development is far more malleable than previously understood. Investigation of acoustic effects on human physiology reveals that specific frequencies can influence genetic expression and cellular development. The megalithic sites, with their sophisticated acoustic properties and astronomical alignments, might represent an ancient science of human development that we're only beginning to rediscover. Their builders might have understood principles of human optimization that we've forgotten, encoding this knowledge in stone structures designed to survive the collapse of civilizations and guide future generations toward recovering lost capabilities. This interpretation transforms our relationship with these monuments from passive admiration to active investigation. Instead of simply marveling at achievements we can't explain, we should be studying these structures as instruction manuals for human development. The precise alignments might indicate optimal environmental conditions for genetic expression. The acoustic chambers might generate frequencies that stimulate dormant potentials. The mathematical relationships might encode formulas for recreating the conditions that originally supported extraordinary human populations. But accessing this ancient knowledge requires overcoming institutional resistance that serves to maintain current limitations on human development. The systematic suppression of evidence suggesting extraordinary ancient capabilities isn't just about protecting historical narratives. It's about maintaining social structures that depend on assumptions about human limitations that might be artificially imposed rather than naturally occurring. If ordinary humans possess dormant capabilities that could rival those of ancient giants, the implications for existing power structures become profound. Educational systems that teach limitations, healthcare institutions that treat symptoms rather than enhancing capabilities, and social organizations that depend on human dependency would all face fundamental challenges if extraordinary human potential became widely recognized and developed. The suppression serves a specific purpose, maintaining controllable populations by ensuring that knowledge of human potential remains hidden or dismissed as fantasy. But this suppression becomes increasingly difficult in an age of global communication and independent research. Evidence continues to surface despite institutional resistance, building an alternative understanding of human history and human capability that challenges official narratives. Independent researchers using modern technologies are documenting anomalous discoveries that institutions prefer to ignore. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures at megalithic sites that suggest more complex construction than officially acknowledged. DNA analysis of ancient remains sometimes yields genetic markers that don't match any known human populations. Construction projects occasionally uncover skeletal remains of unusual size before being quickly sealed off by archaeological authorities. The evidence accumulates despite systematic efforts to suppress it. Photographs of giant excavations from the 19th century circulate through online networks. Private collectors preserve specimens that museums won't display. Local communities maintain oral traditions that contradict official historical accounts. The truth emerges through channels that institutional gatekeepers cannot completely control. This emerging evidence points toward a fundamental revision in our understanding of human history and human potential. The megalithic monuments weren't built by primitive peoples gradually developing civilization through trial and error. They were constructed by beings who represented the full expression of human capability, whose achievements challenge our most basic assumptions about what our species can accomplish. Their legacy lives on in stone, encoded in alignments that track celestial movements, and embedded in proportions that reflect mathematical harmony. These structures aren't just historical curiosities, they're blueprints for human development, instruction manuals for recovering capabilities that we never truly lost but simply forgot how to access. The giants who built these monuments left us more than impressive architecture. They left us a pathway back to our own extraordinary potential, waiting patiently in stone for us to develop sufficient wisdom to appreciate their message. The monuments stand as proof that extraordinary human capability once expressed itself in physical reality, creating achievements that continue to inspire awe thousands of years after their completion. The question isn't whether we can recover these ancient capabilities. The evidence suggests that the potential remains dormant within our species, waiting for the right conditions to manifest once again. The question is whether we have the courage to acknowledge what the stones are telling us, to question the limitations we've accepted as natural, and to explore possibilities that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden. Because the megalithic monuments represent more than just ancient achievements. They represent a promise, a demonstration that human potential extends far beyond current limitations. Their builders proved that our species is capable of extraordinary feats when operating at full capacity. The precision embedded in their construction, the knowledge encoded in their alignments, and the capabilities required for their creation all point toward human potentials that remain accessible if we're willing to remember who we really are. The stones remember what we've been taught to forget. They stand as permanent invitations to rediscover capabilities that once allowed our ancestors to move mountains and align their creations with the stars. The giants who built these structures didn't possess supernatural powers. They embodied the natural potential of human beings operating without artificial limitations. That same potential exists within each of us, dormant in our genetic code and waiting in the quantum field of consciousness itself. The monuments prove that this potential once expressed itself in physical reality. Their presence on our planet is a constant reminder that what was achieved before can be achieved again. The choice is ours. We can continue accepting inadequate explanations that require us to diminish our ancestors' achievements and ignore obvious impossibilities. Or we can embrace the evidence that suggests human potential extends far beyond what we've been taught to believe possible. The megalithic monuments stand as eternal testimony to what we're capable of becoming when we remember our true nature and refuse to accept artificial limitations on human development. They're waiting for us to find the courage to hear their message and reclaim the extraordinary heritage they represent. The stones have been patient for thousands of years. They can wait a little longer for us to remember who we really are and what we're truly capable of achieving. But the invitation remains open, carved in stone and aligned with the stars, calling us home to our own magnificent potential. The time has come to answer that call and step into the extraordinary future that our forgotten ancestors knew was always possible for the human species. The giants who built these monuments weren't just impressive historical figures. They were us, operating at full capacity, showing us what we can become when we remember the truth about human potential and refuse to accept anything less than our birthright of extraordinary capability. The evidence we've examined throughout this investigation leads to an inescapable conclusion that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. Standing before these megalithic monuments, measuring their impossible precision, documenting their mathematical sophistication, we're confronted with achievements that transcend every conventional explanation. These aren't just impressive ancient structures, They're proof that beings of extraordinary capability once walked this earth, leaving behind monuments so advanced they continue to baffle us thousands of years later. The systematic suppression of giant skeletal remains, the dismissal of engineering impossibilities, the marginalization of researchers who document anomalous evidence all serve a specific purpose. They maintain a comfortable narrative about human progress while avoiding uncomfortable truths about our past. But the stones don't lie, and they don't disappear as easily as museum specimens or academic papers. Every measurement we take, every analysis we perform, every honest assessment of what these monuments represent points toward the same revolutionary conclusion. The megalithic sites weren't built by ordinary humans using primitive techniques. They were constructed by giants, beings whose physical stature was matched by intellectual capabilities that allowed them to encode advanced knowledge into permanent stone structures. Consider what this means for our understanding of human potential. If beings 8 to 10 feet tall once existed, possessing proportionally enhanced strength and cognitive abilities, then the movement of massive stone blocks becomes not just possible, but practical. The precision stonework we observe at sites like Puma Punku and Sacsayhuamán makes perfect sense when attributed to beings with the reach, leverage, and fine motor control that giant stature would provide. The mathematical relationships embedded in these structures reveal minds capable of understanding complex geometric principles and astronomical mechanics that supposedly didn't exist for thousands of years after these monuments were built. The acoustic properties demonstrate knowledge of physics that we're only now beginning to appreciate. The global distribution suggests coordinated efforts by populations whose capabilities transcended the supposed limitations of prehistoric peoples. But acknowledging this evidence requires confronting a disturbing reality about institutional control over historical narratives. The disappearance of giant skeletal remains from museum collections isn't accidental oversight. It's deliberate policy implemented by authorities who understand that recognizing extraordinary ancient populations would fundamentally challenge contemporary assumptions about human limitations. This suppression serves broader purposes than protecting academic theories. It maintains social structures built upon beliefs about human capability that might be artificially imposed rather than naturally occurring. If ordinary humans possessed dormant genetic potential for extraordinary size and enhanced cognitive ability, if environmental conditions once supported populations of giants who built these monuments, then current limitations on human development might be reversible. The implications are staggering. Modern research into epigenetics demonstrates that environmental factors can activate or suppress genetic expressions across generations. The atmospheric composition, gravitational effects, or other planetary conditions that once enabled giant populations might be identifiable and potentially recreatable. Understanding these conditions could allow for the recovery of human capabilities that we've been taught to consider impossible. Ancient texts from cultures worldwide describe exactly this kind of cyclical human history. The Hindu yugas, Greek ages of gold and silver, biblical accounts of antediluvian populations with extraordinary longevity and capability. These aren't mythological allegories, but potentially accurate descriptions of real historical periods when human populations operated at levels of development we can barely comprehend. The megalithic monuments might be time capsules from these lost ages, encoding knowledge about human optimization that their builders understood would be needed when extraordinary capabilities emerged again. The precise astronomical alignments might indicate optimal timing for genetic activation. The sophisticated acoustic properties might generate frequencies that stimulate dormant potentials. The mathematical relationships might contain formulas for recreating conditions that support enhanced human development. But accessing this ancient science requires overcoming resistance from institutions invested in maintaining current limitations on human potential. The systematic dismissal of anomalous evidence, the marginalization of researchers who document advanced ancient capabilities, the suppression of discoveries that challenge conventional narratives, all serve to prevent recognition of possibilities that would transform our understanding of what humans can achieve. Independent researchers working outside institutional frameworks continue to document evidence that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. Private laboratories analyzing ancient DNA sometimes find genetic markers that don't correspond to any known human populations. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried structures at megalithic sites that suggest more complex construction than officially recognized. Construction projects occasionally uncover burial sites containing skeletal remains of extraordinary size before being sealed off by archaeological authorities. The evidence accumulates despite systematic suppression efforts. Online networks allow rapid sharing of discoveries that would otherwise disappear into institutional storage. Digital technologies enable precise documentation of ancient achievements that challenge conventional explanations. Global communication permits coordination between researchers who are discovering similar anomalies at sites worldwide. This emerging body of evidence points toward a fundamental revision in our understanding of human history and human potential. The megalithic monuments represent more than impressive ancient architecture. They're physical proof that our species once operated at levels of capability that we've forgotten were possible. The builders of these structures didn't just possess superior physical strength, they demonstrated intellectual sophistication that allowed them to understand and manipulate natural forces in ways that seem almost magical to contemporary observers. Their ability to quarry, transport, and position massive stone blocks with millimetre precision suggests mastery of physics principles that we're only beginning to rediscover. The mathematical knowledge embedded in these monuments reveals minds capable of complex calculations and geometric relationships that require understanding of universal constants and astronomical mechanics. The acoustic engineering demonstrates knowledge of wave propagation and frequency effects that anticipates modern discoveries about sound's influence on human consciousness and development. Most significantly, the global distribution of these capabilities suggests that extraordinary human populations once existed across multiple continents, sharing knowledge and construction techniques that transcended supposed limitations of ancient transportation and communication. This wasn't isolated genius appearing randomly in different locations. This was systematic application of advanced capabilities by populations whose very existence challenges our understanding of prehistoric human development. The systematic elimination of these populations, described in ancient texts as conflicts between giants and smaller humans, might explain both their disappearance and the subsequent suppression of evidence supporting their existence. The victors in these ancient wars would have powerful motivations to erase traces of their adversaries' capabilities, ensuring that knowledge of extraordinary human potential wouldn't inspire others to develop similar abilities. Modern suppression efforts might represent continuation of this ancient pattern, maintaining control over populations by keeping them ignorant of their own potential. Educational systems that teach limitations, healthcare institutions that treat symptoms rather than enhancing capabilities, social structures that depend on human dependency all benefit from maintaining beliefs about human potential that might be artificially imposed rather than naturally occurring. But suppression becomes increasingly difficult as evidence continues to surface, despite institutional resistance. The truth emerges through channels that gatekeepers cannot completely control, building alternative understanding of human history and human capability that challenges official narratives. The megalithic monuments stand as permanent testimony to what our species achieved when operating without artificial limitations. Their precision stonework, mathematical sophistication, and acoustic properties demonstrate capabilities that remain dormant within human genetic potential, waiting for conditions that would allow their expression once again. These structures aren't just historical curiosities or archaeological mysteries, they're instruction manuals for human development, encoding knowledge about optimization techniques that their builders understood would be needed when extraordinary capabilities emerged again in future cycles of human development. The astronomical alignments track celestial movements with precision that requires understanding of cosmic mechanics. The acoustic chambers generate specific frequencies that influence human consciousness and potentially genetic expression. The mathematical relationships encode universal constants and proportional harmonies that reflect deep understanding of natural laws governing development and manifestation. The builders of these monuments left us more than impressive architecture. They left us blueprints for recovering capabilities that we never truly lost, but simply forgot how to access. Their legacy lives on in stone, waiting patiently for us to develop sufficient wisdom to appreciate their message and apply their teachings. The choice facing our species is clear. We can continue accepting inadequate explanations that require us to ignore obvious impossibilities and diminish our ancestors' achievements. Or we can embrace evidence suggesting that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, that extraordinary capabilities once manifested in physical reality and could do so again. The megalithic monuments prove that such capabilities existed. Their builders demonstrated that human beings, operating at full potential, can move mountains and align their creations with cosmic order. The precision embedded in stone, the knowledge encoded in alignments, the sophistication evident in every measurement we take, all testify to achievements that challenge our most basic assumptions about what our species can accomplish. The giants who created these structures weren't supernatural beings or extraterrestrial visitors. They were humans operating without the limitations that currently constrain our development. They embodied the full expression of genetic potentials that remain dormant within our species, waiting for environmental conditions and conscious intention that would allow their manifestation. That potential exists within each of us. The same genetic code that once produced beings capable of building Stonehenge, Puma Punku, and Göbekli Tepe flows through our veins. The same cosmic intelligence that guided ancient builders to encode mathematical relationships and astronomical alignments in permanent stone structures remains accessible to human consciousness, willing to remember its true nature. The monuments stand as eternal invitations to this remembering. They challenge us to question limitations we've accepted as natural, to explore possibilities that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden, to embrace our birthright of extraordinary capability that the builders proved was always possible for the human species. The stones have been patient teachers, waiting thousands of years for students ready to learn what they have to teach. They've preserved knowledge about human potential through the rise and fall of civilizations, through ages of forgetting and suppression, through systematic efforts to erase evidence of what we're truly capable of achieving. But their patience isn't infinite, and the time for remembering has arrived. The evidence can no longer be suppressed or explained away. The precision is measurable, the mathematics is undeniable, the achievements are permanent testimonies carved in stone that will outlast any attempt to diminish their significance. We stand at a threshold. Behind us lies a comfortable narrative of steady progress from primitive beginnings to modern sophistication. Ahead lies recognition that human history is cyclical, that extraordinary capabilities once flourished and could flourish again, that the limitations we accept as natural might be artificially imposed and therefore removable. The megalithic monuments call us forward into this recognition. They invite us to step beyond conventional boundaries and embrace possibilities that our forgotten ancestors knew were always available to human consciousness, willing to remember its true nature and refuse to accept anything less than its full expression. The giants who built these structures weren't just impressive historical figures. They were us, operating at full capacity, demonstrating what becomes possible when human potential is allowed to manifest without artificial constraints. Their monuments stand as proof that such manifestation occurred before and can occur again. Their call echoes across millennia, resonating in the quantum field of human consciousness, where all possibilities exist simultaneously. The monuments aren't just speaking to archaeologists or engineers, they're speaking to something deeper within us, to the part of our genetic memory that remembers when humans walked taller, thought clearer, and moved stone as easily as we move thoughts. But hearing their call requires courage that most institutions lack. It demands acknowledging that we might be living at the lowest point of a cycle, surrounded by achievements that tower above our current capabilities like giants themselves. The precision tolerances at Puma Punku, the mathematical perfection of Stonehenge, the impossible transportation feats at Baalbek. They're not just historical curiosities, they're benchmarks of what human consciousness can achieve when it operates without the limiting beliefs that currently constrain our species. The builders understood something we've forgotten. They knew that consciousness shapes reality, that human intention focused through understanding of natural laws can literally move mountains. The mathematical relationships they encoded weren't just intellectual exercises. They were operational manuals for working with forces that we've relegated to the realm of physics textbooks, forces that remain as available today as they were when giants walked the earth. Their acoustic chambers weren't just architectural features, they were consciousness-altering technologies that could shift human awareness into states where extraordinary capabilities become accessible. The frequencies generated within these stone structures create standing waves that interact with human neural oscillations, potentially activating dormant genetic programs that express as enhanced physical and cognitive abilities. Modern neuroscience is beginning to validate what the giants knew intuitively. Specific frequency patterns can induce neuroplasticity, alter gene expression, and activate neural networks associated with expanded awareness and enhanced capability. The acoustic properties of megalithic sites represent a technology for human optimization that we're only now beginning to understand. despite the fact that we've been surrounded by working examples for thousands of years. This isn't speculation. It's measurable science hidden in plain sight within structures that mainstream archaeology insists were built by primitive peoples using simple tools. The evidence demands a choice. We can continue pretending that Bronze Age farmers accidentally created acoustic chambers with properties that modern sound engineers struggle to replicate. Or we can acknowledge that the builders possessed knowledge about human consciousness and optimization that we've systematically forgotten. The choice we make determines not just how we understand the past, but what becomes possible for our future. Because if the giants were real, if they encoded functional knowledge into these monuments, if their capabilities remain dormant within human genetic potential, then the question isn't whether we can recover what was lost. The question is whether we're ready for what we might become. The monuments stand waiting, their frequencies still resonating, their alignment still tracking cosmic cycles, their mathematical relationships still encoding universal principles. They're not just reminders of what was possible, they're active instruments for remembering who we really are beneath the limitations we've been taught to accept as permanent. The time has come to stop viewing these structures as impossible achievements from a primitive past and start recognizing them as functional technologies for accessing extraordinary human potential. The giants didn't disappear. They left instructions carved in stone, waiting for a generation brave enough to remember that limitations are choices, not natural laws, and that generation might be us standing at the threshold of rediscovering capabilities that built these monuments and left them as beacons calling us home to our own magnificent potential. The stones are still singing their ancient song. The question is whether we're finally ready to listen.